everyone. Today we are going to discuss part 2 of Gupta Empire. In the first part we discussed about the rise and growth of the Gupta Empire, its eminent kings and the downfall of the Gupta Empire. In the second part we will discuss about the system of administration, the decline of trade, the social development, art, literature and the last science and technology. So without any delay, let's begin the class. Now, what was the system of administration in Gupta period? The king was a pivotal person in the system of administration. Unlike the Mauryan period, the Gupta kings used pompous titles like Parameshwara, Parambhatraka and Maharaja for their names. So they use pompous titles like Maharaja, etc. for themselves. This also shows that they ruled over lesser king and the kingship was hereditary. So this shows that they ruled over lesser kings and kingship was but the royal power was limited because there was an absence of a firm practice called primogeniture. So there was absence of which means that the throne always did not go to the eldest son. So the meaning of primogeniture is that the eldest child inherits the parents' property, title, estate, excluding all other siblings, but it did not existed in the Gupta period, as the eldest son was not inherited by the throne. So this was one thing. But this created uncertainties of which the chiefs and the high officials could take advantage. Since there was this absence of primogeniture, the high officials and chiefs, they could take advantage of this. Next, Gupta kings made magnificent gifts to the Brahmins, and to express their gratitude, Brahmins compared them to different gods. So that means not only did they use the pompous titles, but they were also compared to God, which shows that they have attributes of God and they held a very high position. So they were compared to God by the Brahmins, and the Brahmins were given magnificent gifts also in return. So one god was Vishnu, who was important in Gupta period, who is known as the protector and preserver. Vishnu, and in the coins of Gupta Empire we see the representation of goddess Lakshmi, who is wife of god Vishnu. So on the coins goddess Lakshmi was represented. So this was one thing. Next we come to the system of taxation. This was about the kings. This was about the Gupta kings, what was their role in the administration. Next we come to the system of taxation. The land taxes increased in Gupta period, but the taxes on trade and commerce declined. So there was increase in land taxes, which shows that there was increase in the production also. The cultivation of land also increased. The produce increased, therefore the tax on the land also increased. But we see that there is decline in the tax on trade and commerce. That shows that there was decrease in trade also. There was decline in foreign trade during Gupta period. Therefore, there was less tax on trade. Increase in land taxation. That means more land was brought under cultivation and produce was increased, and there was decrease in tax on trade and commerce, which shows there was decline in trade. The king collected tax which varied from 1/4 to 1/6 of the produce. So the tax that was collected by king which varied from 1/4 to 1/6 of produce. This was one thing. And whenever the royal army passed through the countryside, the local had to feed them. So instead of taxation, the royal army, whenever they passed through the countryside, the local had to feed them. And the peasants had to supply food grains, furniture, animals, etc. for the maintenance of royal officers on duty in the rural areas. So peasants had to supply animal, food grain and furniture to the royal army to the Royal Army and officials who were on duty in the rural area. In central and western India, the villagers were also subjected to forced labor called vishtis, who served the royal army and officials. So, in central and western India, the villagers were subjected to forced labor called vishti. Who served royal army So this was about the taxation and what peasants had to give if along with the tax. Next we come to the judicial system which was present in the Gupta Empire. The judicial system was far more developed in the Gupta period than it was in any of the period than in earlier times, and we say that several law books were compiled in this period. So it was the most developed law was most developed in this period during Gupta period. In Gupta period, and various law books were written. And compiled. That shows that there was an emphasis on the law, and we see that there was clear definition and demarcation of the law, that is criminal and civil law. So for the first time civil and criminal law was clearly defined, and demarcated. This is an important advancement that was made during Gupta period. adultery and theft came under the criminal law, and various disputes regarding property came under civil law. So, adultery and theft came under criminal law, and various disputes or property came under civil law. And there was one more development, that elaborate law was made on the inheritance. So, elaborate laws, they were also laid down for the inheritance of property. And one more thing was that during this period also many laws were continued to be based on different varna. So, which means that there was not equality of the law. Different varna had different set of rules and regulation and had different laws. So, elaborate laws were laid for inheritance. And different law for different varna. This was continued from before. This was the system before also, in Mauryan period also this was the system. So, this was one thing which continued in Gupta period, that there was no equality of law. It was the duty of the king to uphold the law, and he tried the cases with the help of Brahmin priests. The guild of artisans, merchants and others were governed by their own laws. This shows that Brahmin priest, the guild of artisans, merchant played an important role in the system of administration in Gupta period. They played an important role in the judicial system also. King consulted Brahmin priests and guilds of merchants, artisans. The army in the Gupta period was not huge, as the numerical strength of the Gupta army is not known to us, but evidently the king maintained a standing army which was supplemented by the forces occasionally supplied by the feudatories. So, there was a standing army. The army was supplied occasionally whenever needed by the feudatories. This also shows that the feudatories, the feudal system was present in the Gupta period, and the feudal chief, they also played an important role. And the numerical strength of the army was not huge, as we don't have any evidence for that, but still it was not as huge as it was in the Mauryan period. Army, it was not as huge as it was in the Mauryan period, not huge. Numerical strength is not known. The king maintained standing army which was supplemented occasionally by feudatories. As I told in the previous class that the chariots and the elephants lost their importance during Gupta period. So the chariots, they receded in the background and cavalry came into the forefront. So the chariot receded in the background. The cavalry came into forefront. And I told before in the first part, horses played an important role in the Gupta army, and Gupta kings were very good horse riders also and very chivalry. Horse archery became prominent in military tactics. So horses gained importance and horse archery played important role in military tactics. So this was the army that was present in Gupta period. Next, what was the system of bureaucracy that was present in the Gupta Empire? The system of bureaucracy. The Gupta bureaucracy was not as elaborate as that of the Mauryas. The most important officer in the Gupta Empire was the Kumar Matyas. So it was not as elaborate as Mauryas, and the most important officer was Kumara Matyas. The most important officer that was present in the Gupta bureaucracy was Kumar Matyas, and they were appointed by the king in the home provinces and were paid in cash. That means that was important official, as he was paid in cash, appointed by king. He was appointed by king and he was paid in cash. Only important people were paid in cash and gold coins in Gupta period. Since the Guptas were Vaishyas, as I told in the first part also, that Guptas belong to the Vaishya varna of the caste system, the recruitment was not confined to the upper varnas only. So people from different varnas were also part of the bureaucracy. They were also recruited into the system of bureaucracy in Gupta period. So the recruitment was not confined to upper varna only, as Guptas belong to West. Several officers came to be combined in the hands of the same person and posts became hereditary, and this naturally weakened the royal control as lot of power was given to the officers in Gupta period. So the royal kings, they lost control over them. Now, what was the system of organization in the provincial and local administration? The system of administration in local and provincial areas. How it was organized? We will discuss this. Provincial areas. The empire was divided into divisions called bhuktis, and each bhukti was placed under the charge of an uparika. Okay, first I'll write it down. The empire was divided into bhukti, and it was placed under the charge of uparika. And bhukti was further divided into districts called vishayas. And Vishyas was placed under the charge of Vishyapati, and it was placed under the charge of Vishyapati. And in the eastern India, the Vishyas were further divided into Vithis, and Vithis were divided into villages. So, in eastern India, this was further divided into Vithis, and Vithis were further divided into villages. So, this was the division of the area. This was how the empire was divided for the administration. And village headmen played an important role in the administration of the village. He managed the village affairs with the assistance of elders, and the administration of village and small town was led by the local elements, that is local people, and loan transactions can be executed without the consent of the local people, which means that the local people, villagers were part of the administration. This shows the integration of the locals and local people and the villagers and other officials also in the system of administration. Next, what was the system of administration in the urban area, in the town? System of administration urban area. So, in the urban area, professional bodies, they manage the affairs of the town, okay, and they were given considerable share also for that. We see that the seals from Vaishali show that artisans, merchants and scribes served on the same corporate body, and in this capacity they conducted the affairs of the town. So, the seals from Vaishali and from Behta indicate that the guilds flourished exceedingly well. As they were part of the administration, there was integration of the local people and the people basically in the administration of the Gupta Empire. Besides this, common organization, artisans and bankers were organized into their own separate guilds, and we find this in the seals of Vaishali and Behta also. So, artisan system of administration was managed by artisans, merchants and guilds who acted as a corporate body. Acted as a corporate body and managed the affairs of town, state and we find seals in Vaishali, Behta above them. Sorry. We hear of numerous guilds of artisans, traders, etc. at Behta and Vaishali, and at Mandsaur in Malwa and in Indore also. Silk weavers maintained their own guilds, that means there were several guilds also. At Mandsaur and Indore, silk weavers maintained their own guild. Mandsaur and Indore, silk weavers had their guilds, and in the district of Bulandshahr in western Uttar Pradesh, oil pressers also had their own guilds. So, in the district of Bulandshahr, oil pressers maintained their guild, and these guilds were important as they enjoyed certain immunities by the royal by the king that was given to them. They enjoyed certain immunities, like they could look after the affairs of their own members and punished those who violated the customs and law of the guilds. So, they enjoyed certain immunities from the given to them by the king, like they managed their own affairs and punished those who violated the customs and law of the guild. And this type of system of administration was applied in North Bengal, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh and some adjoining areas of Madhya Pradesh, and these rulers were directly appointed by the Gupta kings. So, in North Bengal, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, the officers, these were appointed by the Gupta kings and they ruled directly. That means they acted like a separate ruler in this area. Feudatory chiefs also played important role in the system of administration in the Gupta period, as the major part of the empire was held by the feudatory chiefs and many of these were conquered by Samudragupta. So, feudatory chiefs were also important. There was prevalence of feudal system. Feudatory chiefs were there and they were conquered by Samudragupta. He was an important king, important Gupta king. And these vassals who lived, they lived on the fringe of the empire. The vassals lived on the fringe of empire and they were obligated to do three obligations that were given to them. First was they offered homage to the sovereign by personal attendance at his court. So, they had to give the sovereign personal attendance and serve him. Secondly, they paid tribute to him, they paid tribute to the sovereign and they presented to him his daughters for marriage. So, three obligations that was to be performed by vassals were providing homage and personal attendance to sovereign and they had to pay tribute and to provide daughter for marriage. And in this return, he obtained charters for ruling in the areas. So, in return, vassals obtained charters for ruling in this area. and the charters which were marked with the royal Garud seem to have been issued to the vassals. So, the charters marked by Garud was given to them. Thus, Guptas had several tributary princes in Madhya Pradesh and elsewhere, and which led to the subordinate position of the prince into feudal vassal only. The second important feudal development was the grant of fiscal and administrative concessions to priests and administrators. So, one was this, that they obtained charters for ruling in the area, and second feudal development was that they were given fiscal and administrative concessions. By the king. So, this was also important. This practice of giving fiscal and administrative concession started in the Deccan by the Satavahanas, and it became a regular practice in Gupta times, particularly in Madhya Pradesh, where religious functionaries were granted land free of tax forever, and they were authorized to collect from the peasants all the taxes which had to go to emperor. It went to them, which otherwise would have gone to the emperor. So, they were given these administrative and fiscal concession. The villages granted to the beneficiaries could not be entered by royal agents and retainers. So, this was also one immunity that was given to the beneficiary, that no royal agent, retainers, etc. could enter the village without their permission, and the beneficiaries were also empowered to punish the criminals. So, they played important role in the judicial system also. So, feudal lords, feudal chiefs had an important position in the system of administration in Gupta Empire. Whether state officials were paid by grants of land in Gupta time is not clear, but we find abundance of gold coins that suggest that higher officials were paid in cash, and many officers were paid by land grants. So, this was one feature. Since much of the imperial administration was managed by feudatories and beneficiaries, as we have studied, the Gupta rulers did not require as many officials as the Mauryas did, and the officers were not required in large number as compared to the Mauryas, since the state did not take part in economic activities on any big scale, because for that there was guild of merchants that played important role. Hence, the state did not require large number of officers particularly for that, and the participation of leading artisans, merchants and elders in the system of administration, even if it's judicial system, or in the land transaction, land taxation. They played important role in the rural and urban administration, and it lessened the need for maintaining a large retinue of officers. So, the number of officers that was present in Gupta period was very less, as the local people, as mainly the ordinary people, they also participated in the system for administrating the empire. Therefore, the Gupta neither needed nor possessed the elaborate administrative machinery of modern times, and in several ways their political system appears to be feudal. In the later period, princes were also made subordinates like the feudal vassals. So, they played an important role in the political as the system of tax we studied in the system of taxation, the tax on trade and commerce declined. It was because there was decline of the trade and there was rise of the landed classes. So, there was decline of trade and rise of landed class. The economic life of the Gupta times is reflected by the writings of Chinese traveller Fa Hien, who visited different parts of the Gupta Empire, and he informs us that the Magadh was full of cities and its rich people supported Buddhism and gave charities. So, we get to know about the economic life through the writings of Chinese traveller Fa Hien. And he says that there was decline in foreign trade. Till 550 AD, India carried on some trade with the Eastern Roman Empire, to which it exported silk. But around AD 550, the people of the Eastern Roman Empire learned the art of growing silk from Chinese, and this adversely affected the export trade of India. Since till 550 AD, after 550 AD, the foreign trade declined, as the trade with Eastern Roman Empire, also known as Byzantine Empire, they learned the art of growing silk, which they imported from India. They learned the art of growing silk from the Chinese, and therefore this affected the export trade of India. And during the middle of the 6th century AD, the demand for Indian silk in abroad had slackened. Therefore, because as a consequence of that, the silk guild weavers migrated from their original home in Western India to Mandsaur for better opportunities and changed their profession by the middle of 5th century AD. This was also one reason for the decline of the Gupta Empire. I have told about this in part 1 of Gupta Empire. Next, the striking development of the Gupta period was the emergence of priestly landlords. This was about the trade. Now next was the emergence of priestly landlords, which was at the cost of local peasants. They exploited the local peasants and became wealthy. Since land grants was made to them, to the priest by the kings, it brought, because of that, they bought many virgin area under cultivation, and since they were given fiscal and administrative concessions, just the way I told in the previous topic kabhi, so they were given administrative and fiscal concession. So that led to the taxation on peasants which were employed in the field, and the land grants made to the priests certainly bought many virgin area under cultivation, and these beneficiaries imposed themselves on the local tribal peasants, who were reduced to a lower status, and in the central and western India they were subjected to forced labor called vishtis, which served the royal army. So the priestly class emerged at the cost of local peasants. They exploited local peasants and brought virgin area under cultivation and land grants were made to them, and physical concession was also given to them. And local peasants were subjected to lower status and in central and western India they were subjected to forced labor. So there's a glitch. Anyway, so this was this led to the rise of the landed class, and there was decline of trade. Next we come to the social development during the Gupta period. As I told before, that land grants to the Brahmins were made on a large scale. Magnificent gifts were given to the Brahmin priests by the kings. This shows that the Brahmin supremacy continued in Gupta time. So, Brahmin supremacy existed, and the Guptas, who were originally from Vaishya, came to be looked upon as Kshatriya by the Brahmins. The Brahmins represented the kings as possessing the attributes of God, and the Gupta princes and the Gupta prince became great supporters of the Brahmanical order. Therefore, the Brahmins accumulated wealth on account of numerous land grants. So, they claimed many privileges which are listed in the law book of Narada. So, Brahmin supremacy was there, and all the privileges is written in the law book of Narada. The caste proliferated into numerous subcastes as a result of two factors. On one, the large number of foreigners had been assimilated into the Indian society, and each group of foreigners was considered a kind of Hindu caste. So, the caste also proliferated into two subcastes, that was one of the foreigners who had been assimilated into the Indian society and they were now considered as Hindu. And secondly, the foreigners mainly came as conquerors and they were given the status of Kshatriya in the society. The Hunas, who came towards the close of the 5th century, ultimately came to be recognized as one of the 36 clans of the Rajput, and even now some Rajput bear the title of Huna. So, one reason was the foreigner, the caste was proliferated. The caste was divided into subcastes. One was of the foreigners, Hunas, who were assimilated into the Indian society and were considered Kshatriyas. And the second reason was the increase in the number of caste was the absorption of many tribal people into Brahmanical society by way of land grants. So, many tribal people were caste increased as they were given land grants. So, they were considered Brahmins only. They were absorbed into So, the two subcastes were of the foreigners and tribal people. Foreigners, Hunas, who came to India and were considered Kshatriyas, and second was tribal people who were absorbed into Brahmanical society by the way of land grants. So, the ruling chief of the tribe was ascribed a respectable origin, and most of the tribal people were given a low origin. Only the ruling chief was given a respectable origin, but rest of the tribal people were given a low origin. And every tribe now became a kind of caste in Hindu society. So, they became a caste, tribal people, they became a separate caste. The position of Sudras and women improved in this period. They were now permitted to listen to the epics and the Puranas. So, the position of women and Sudras improved as they were allowed to listen epics and Purans, and they could also worship a new god called Krishna, That means there was emergence of new god also in this period, that was Krishna. And from 7th century onwards, the Sudras were mainly represented as agriculturists and as they were represented as servants in the earlier period. So, they worshipped new god Krishna, and Sudras became agriculturists, not servants, as they were considered in the earlier time. The number of untouchables increased, especially the Chandalas. The Chandalas appeared in society as early as the 5th century BC. So that means they have been appearing they have been part of the Indian society since 5th century BC. But by the 5th century AD, their number grew, which attracted the attention of Chinese pilgrim Fa Hien, and he informs us that Chandalas lived outside the village and dealt in meat and flesh, and whenever they entered the town of the upper caste people, the upper caste people kept themselves at a distance from them, because the road was supposed to have been polluted by them. So there was a discrimination also, and there was increase in number of Chandalas according to Fa Hien, and they dealt in Fa Hien, and they meat and flesh. So this was the social development during the Gupta period. Brahmanism held supremacy. There was emergence of two subcastes, that was Kshatriya and the tribal people who were absorbed into Brahmanical society. Shudra and women, their position improved as they were allowed to listen and hear the epics and the Puranas, and Shudras were considered as agriculturists and not servants who served the upper higher varnas, and there was increase in the number of Chandalas. The next religion, that was Buddhism and Brahmanism, that existed in the Gupta period. But Buddhism no longer received a royal patronage in the Gupta period as it received during modern period. Fa Hien gives the impression that this religion was in a very flourishing state, but really Buddhism was not so important in the Gupta period as it was in the days of Ashoka and Kanishk. Kanishk was a patron of Buddhism, so Buddhism lost its importance. It was not flourishing during Gupta period. And as I told that Brahmanical supremacy emerged, and this was Brahmanism had come to the forefront. The two gods who commanded the worship of their followers were Vishnu and Shiva. So Brahmanism flourished, and two important gods were Vishnu and Shiva. Vishnu emerged as the god of devotion, and he came to be represented as the savior of the varna system, and numerous legends gathered about him, and a whole Purana called Vishnu Purana was compiled in his honor. And similarly, a law book called Vishnu Smriti was also named after this god. So that means Purana and Puran, Vishnu Puran was compiled, and Vishnu Smriti was written. This was a law book. As I told that in Gupta period, the judicial system was very advanced and several law books were written. One was this Vishnu Smriti and Vishnu Purana. And by the 4th century AD, there appeared the famous Vaishnava work called Bhagavad Gita, which taught devotion to Lord Krishna and stressed the performance of the functions assigned to each varna. So, by 4th century AD, Bhagavad Gita came into importance, and few Gupta kings were worshipper of Shiva, the god of destruction, and he became important in the later years, but not as important as Vishnu in the early phase of the Gupta rule. So this was about the emergence of the new god, that is Shiva, in the later period. Idol worship in the temples became a common feature of Hinduism from the Gupta period. So idol worship began from this. This was important. Idol worship was done. And many festivals also came to be celebrated. Agricultural festivals observed by different classes of people were given religious garb and color and turned into good source of income for the priest, which shows that priests flourished. They were in the flourishing state. So agricultural festivals began to be celebrated. The Gupta kings followed a policy of tolerance towards the different religious sects. We find no examples and evidence of the persecution of the followers of Buddhism and Jainism. That means Buddhism and Jainism, it also existed side by side. It was simultaneously, and the kings were tolerant towards Buddhism and Jainism religion. And this was also on account of the change in the character of Buddhism, which had come to acquire many of the features of Hinduism. So in the later period, Buddhism also acquired many features of the Hinduism. This was about the the Buddhism, Jainism, social development during Gupta period. On the religion. Now, what was the art? What were the significance of the art that were made in the Gupta period? The Gupta period is called the golden age of ancient India. Guptas possessed a large amount of gold, the source of which is unknown, and they issued largest number of gold coins. Samudragupta and Chandragupta too were patrons of art and literature. So, they issued large number of gold coins, and Samudragupta and Chandragupta too were patron of art and literature. Samudragupta is represented on his coins playing the lute, veena. Samudragupta playing lute, and Chandragupta too is credited with maintaining in his court 9 luminaries or great scholars. So, Chandragupta too maintained 9 luminaries in his court. In ancient India, art was mostly inspired by religion. Survival of non-religious art from ancient India are few. Buddhism gave great impetus to art in modern and post-modern times. Most of them belong to Gupta times. They depict various events in life of Gautam Buddha and the previous Buddhas, and these paintings are lifelike and natural, and they are marked by the brilliance of their colors, which have not faded even after 14th century or so. Since the Guptas were great supporters of Brahmanism, for first time Gupta period images, we see in the Gupta period images of Vishnu and Shiva and some other Hindu gods also. So, there was presence of images of Buddha and we find images of Vishnu and Shiva also. At many places we find group of important god, that was a whole pantheon in which the chief god appears in the middle and his retainers and subordinates appear on the same panel all around him. The leading god is represented large in size and retainers and subordinates are drawn on a small scale. This represents a clear societal distinction and hierarchy, which the Gupta period was poor in architecture. As we see that there are a group of god in which the most important god is large in size, whereas his subordinates and other gods are smaller in size, which shows that there was distinction in the society and there was the presence of hierarchy also, as the male god was represented large in size. The architecture that was present in the Gupta time was not as great, as we find only few brick temples in Uttar Pradesh and stone temples, and few examples of brick temples are the Bhitargaon. I'll just write it down. Few brick temples are found like Bhitargaon in Uttar Pradesh, then there is Bitari in Ghazipur, and Deoghar in Jhansi. And the society was hierarchical. The Buddhist University Nalanda, which was set up in 5th century, its earlier structure that was made up of brick also belonged to this period. So, Nalanda University earliest brick structure belonged to this period. Now, next is the literature that was in Gupta period. As Samudragupta and Chandragupta too, they were patron of art and literature. So, literature was developed in Gupta period, and there was a remarkable production of secular literature in Gupta period. So, during this period there was remarkable production of secular literature To this period belongs 13 plays that was written by Bhasa, 13 play written by Bhasa, and to this period belongs famous work of Kalidas who wrote Abhiraja Shakuntalam. Which is considered to be one of the best 100 literary works in the world, and it is one of the earliest Indian works to be translated into European language. The other work was Bhagavad Gita. That is also very important. Bhagavad Gita is also important. Two things that can be noted about the play that was produced in the Gupta period were, first, the feature was that they were all comedies and there was no tragedy. It was comedy. And the second one was the characters of the higher and lower varna do not speak the same language. The women and Shudras featuring in this play use Prakrit language. So, two features of the play were comedy and no tragedy. And secondly, the language that was spoken between higher and lower varna was different. Women and Shudra speak Prakrit language. And during this period, we see that there was an increase in the production of religious literature, and most work of the period had a strong religious bias. The two great epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata, were finally compiled in the 4th century AD. So, Ramayana, as there was increase in the number of religious literature, Ramayana and Mahabharata it was compiled in 4th century AD. The Puranas, earliest epics and various smritis were also compiled in Gupta period, and law books were written in verse. So, Puranas, epics and smritis were also compiled, and the phase of writing commentaries on smriti began after Gupta period. So, Puranas, epics, smritis, law books were compiled and law book was written in verse. Law book written in verse. Written in words. The Gupta period also saw the development of Sanskrit grammar based on Panini and Patanjali. So, there was development of Sanskrit grammar based on Panini and Patanjali. And this period is particularly memorable for the compilation of the Amar Kosa by Amar Simha, who was a luminary in the court of Chandragupta II. And in the part 1, I told about Amar Kosa by Amar Simha, who was a scholar in the Ujjain court of Chandragupta II. So, it was Amar Kosa by Amar Simha. On the whole, the Gupta period was a bright phase in the history of classical literature, and it developed an ornate style which was different from the old simple Sanskrit, and the court language was Sanskrit. Lastly, we come to science and technology. In the field of mathematics, we come across during this period a work called Aryabhatya, which was written by Aryabhat, who belonged to Patliputra. So, in the field of mathematics, book Aryabhatya was written by Aryabhat. who was a great mathematician. A Gupta inscription of 448 AD from Allahabad district suggests that the decimal system was known in India at the beginning of the 5th century AD. So, in Gupta inscription, it's written that which belong to 448 AD. Decimal system was known the beginning of 5th century AD. So this means that decimal system was also known. Gupta inscription at Allahabad, near Allahabad. In the fields of astronomy, a book called Romaka Siddhanta was also compiled, and it was influenced by Greek idea, as can be inferred from its name. So, in the field of astronomy, book called Romaka Siddhanta was compiled, and it was influenced by Greek ideas. The Gupta craftsmen distinguished themselves by their work in iron and bronze. We know of several bronze images of the Buddha which began to be produced on a considerable scale because of the knowledge of advanced iron technology. So, they were skilled in the use of iron and bronze, and several images of Buddha was made from bronze and iron. Advanced technology was known. And we can see this at the example is iron pillar that is found in Delhi at Mehrauli, which has not yet attracted the rust and still stands the same as it was in the 4th century AD. It has not gathered any rust in the subsequent 15 centuries, which is a great tribute to the technological skill of the craftsmen. And it was impossible to produce such a pillar in any iron foundry in the West until about a century ago. That means Indians, we were well aware of the use of iron long before it came into the West, and it's a pity that the later craftsmen could not develop this knowledge further. So, this was about the life of the Gupta age, life in the Gupta age, and it was about the science and technology. I hope this chapter helps, and happy learning.